Welcome to the Southeastern 14 podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. I've got a special guest today. He is Neal McCready. He runs the Rivals.com site for Ole Miss. That is revelgrove.com. He is one of the best in the business at this. He's a good guy and a good friend. Neal, really thrilled to have you on today, so thanks for joining us.
Chris, I appreciate you accommodating me. Thanks for having me.
Let's start with the program you cover, Ole Miss. It has been just a tumultuous 5-6 years for Ole Miss for various reasons, but it seemed like you guys were on an electric ride down there in Oxford this year with all Lane Kiffin did. What was that like to cover? What is the mood of that fan base right now after a Sugar Bowl loss? It was disappointing, but also explicable given Matt Corral getting hurt so early in that game.
Yeah, tumultuous is probably one good way to put it. This is a staff that came in and I think sort of revitalized the program and got the kids excited. They went 5-5 in the pandemic year, and they got to the Outback Bowl and won the Outback Bowl. And I think the Outback Bowl win over Indiana was kind of a launching pad for them. It built their confidence. And they went into this season with Matt Corral at quarterback and kind of a revamped defense. And, they had a couple of games early in the season. They started off 3-0, they went to Alabama and lost. And then they had 2 games in a row at home against Arkansas and at Tennessee where, Chris, literally the game, the ball is in the air with the game on the line in the final seconds of both games. If you go back and remember it, Ole Miss led Arkansas 52-45, and Arkansas took the ball and drove down the field and scored a touchdown on the game's final play. Literally, as time expired, they scored, and Sam Pittman elected to go for 2, and they were unsuccessful. That was a huge play. That's one play that changes the course of the season. And then a week later, Ole Miss goes to Tennessee, kind of the same thing. It's this wild, crazy game with the fans throwing stuff and the golf ball that hit Lane Kiffin. And all of that stuff, one of the things that people forget is that Tennessee had the football at the end, throwing it into the end zone with the chance to win. And on third down, Hendon Hooker threw a pass that was an inch high. And, otherwise that's probably a touchdown for Tennessee, and that's a completely different game. And, Ole Miss could easily have lost both of those games. And so, but instead they won them and started building some confidence. And they lost at Auburn, but they beat Texas A&M at home, and they did not play well, but they beat Vanderbilt at home. And then they went to Mississippi State and played pretty well and won that game. And next thing you know, you're 10-2 and you're ranked, I guess, 8th in the country, and you're in the Sugar Bowl against Baylor. So it was kind of a magical season for them. I think people have a tendency to look back at, what if they won at Auburn? Would they 11-1? What would people forget how close those two games in October were against Arkansas and Tennessee that could have gone the other way. But so the mood of the fan base it's pretty good. Now look, Matt Corral's gone. He'll be in the NFL next year, and Ole Miss is doing the transfer portal hunting thing at quarterback and a lot of other positions as well. And it feels like this is sort of crossroads. The other part of the Lane Kiffin experience, I think, for Ole Miss fans that they've had to get used to, and I think they fight about it and argue amongst themselves about it, is that, his name pops up for job after job. It popped up for LSU, even though he was never a candidate there. It popped up for Florida, even though Scott Strickland never considered Lane Kiffin. It was talked about a lot at Miami, even though Miami appeared set on Mario Cristobal from minute one. It popped up this last week about the Minnesota Vikings, of all places. And so, people get angry about it. And I think they have to come to the realization that it's something that Lane Kiffin likes. He likes his name being out there. Personally, I think he likes his name being out there to the point that sometimes he's the one that puts his name out there. But, all in all, I think they've enjoyed the roller coaster.
You would know the answer to this better than I, but that seems like a situation where water has found its own level in a way, because he didn't seem to really get considered for the big jobs. I don't know what the NFL holds or doesn't hold for him, so I'll just kind of throw that out of the equation mostly, unless you have some insight there. But it seems to me that is a really good fit for him. Ole Miss is a place where you can win. You're not going to be Alabama. You're not going to be Georgia right now, that's for sure either. But at the same time, they were the third best team in the league, and that's pretty good accomplishment. It seems to me like this is a pretty good marriage. I know you wouldn't probably think it unless you're around him, but I know you have told me he's a pretty shy guy. This just seems like a marriage with he and Ole Miss that works and is the right fit. And it seems like that's the level where he, fairly or unfairly, seems to have settled in terms of perception, given that he's not really getting much of a look, it seems, when these other big jobs open.
Yeah, look, he's two guys. This is a thing that when I say this, Ole Miss fans kind of get angry, but this is true what I'm about to say. On game day, Lane Kiffin's elite. He's an elite offensive mind. He is an elite coach. Kids like playing for him. He's consistent. His teams are always ready on game day. He's an offensive genius. I think he's a savant from a play calling standpoint. I think he sees things in real time that most coaches don't see until they watch the film. So on Saturday, he's phenomenal. Sunday through Friday, he's a work in process. I don't think that anybody would have been around that program would say they're the picture of organization. I don't think anybody around them would say that the program is the picture of efficiency. I don't think anyone around Kiffin would say that Sunday through Friday he's a great communicator. All of those things work against him. Now, here's the rub, and this is the part that Ole Miss fans struggle with. If he had that part down pat, he would never have come to Ole Miss, because he'd be, frankly, Chris, he'd be still the head coach at USC, or he would have followed Pete Carroll model, and he'd be coaching the, New York Jets right now or something. I mean, he would be at a super high level. He would be at one of the 4 or 5 blue blood college football jobs, or he would be in the NFL, and he would be successful. I mean, it would have been there for a long time. The truth is, when Ole Miss hired Lane Kiffin, they knew they were hiring the good with the bad and the bad with the good. And they were gambling that he would come in, he would make the program relevant, check. They were gambling that he would come in and make the program exciting, check. That he would sell more tickets. And it took a minute because of the pandemic, but he did. And that he would grow as a coach in the process, and that one of two things would happen. He would either fall in love with Oxford and stay for a long, long time, or he would do so well that it would launch him into another job, and he would leave the program far better than what he inherited it. And we're still waiting for the resolution there. So that's the deal with him. They were the third best team in the league this year. There's no question about it. It was close, though. And so there's a tendency for Ole Miss people to look at it, I think, like anybody would, and go, we've arrived. And no, I mean, 10-2 could have easily been 8-4. We just chronicled that. 8-4 and 10-2 are different numbers. He's got to now show people, and I do think the people out there that when they put together coaching lists at places at the Alabamas and the Georgias and the Ohio States and Notre Dames of the world, I do think these people are waiting before they put Lane Kiffin on their list to see if he can maintain success at a program like Ole Miss. He stayed at FAU for 3 years. This will be his third season at Ole Miss. And I do think there's a part of people that wonder if this guy can build something. Can he stay someplace 5-6 years, build it, make it his? That's probably the one question that's left about him. And I don't know that he's answered it yet. I don't know that, and when I say that, I don't mean that he can't do it. We're about to find out. I just don't think he's ever done it yet. He stayed at Tennessee for 1 year. He got to USC and he inherited probation and a disaster, and all of that wasn't his fault. The deal with the Raiders, he wasn't the one that wanted to draft Jamarcus Russell. That was Al Davis. God rest his soul. And he's just never been at a place that long. He was at Alabama for, I guess, 3-4 seasons, and then he went to FAU, and he was there for 3 years before he got the Ole Miss job, and this will be his third year. So that's who he is, and I think people around college athletics want to see if he can sustain it. And for Lane, there will come a point, I think, where if he is successful and he does sustain it, does he look at Ole Miss and go, hey, this is what I've built, this is mine? Or does he want something bigger, or is he just one of these people that has, and I don't think this is a bad thing necessarily, Chris, who just kind of has perpetual wanderlust, where new is always exciting, and the coming in and renovating and reinvigorating is what they love to do. I mean, look, there are people out there that love to flip houses. They move into a house, they pour heart and soul into it, they make it great, they sell it for a profit, and they go do it again. That's their high, that's their adrenaline, and it's possible, but that's Lane Kiffin. We're about to find out.
Neal, what are your thoughts on just the general state of SEC football right now? I mean, the low-hanging fruit is the title game on one end and two SEC teams in there, and the other end, of course, expansion. But let's deal with everybody else for a second. How does the pecking order sort out in this league the next few years? Because you look at the coaches that have been hired, it's incredible. I don't, God help me if we know where LSU is going to go next. Florida, another one. I think they made a good hire, but yeah, I mean, it's crazy how loaded this league is.
Here's the truth. Here's what we don't know. Let's just be real for a minute. You watch the transfer portal.
Yeah.
Okay? Arkansas just had 2 starters, including a kid that was a team captain from New Orleans, weren't recruited by LSU out of high school, go to Arkansas, have success, play a lot, multi-year starters, just played on a team that went 9-4, beat LSU. They just transferred to LSU. Now, obviously, everybody's tampering, and I'm not going to be the guy that's like, woe is the tampering. Ole Miss is tampering. Ole Miss is having people tamper with Ole Miss players. There's no question about it. But you look at this, and so you just can't help but wonder, is this the beginning of something where a kid from Florida just goes to Georgia, or a kid from Georgia just goes to Alabama, a kid from Auburn just goes to Alabama, a kid from Vanderbilt just goes to Tennessee, we just go on and on and on. And if that's the case, this is about, I mean, let's be real here. This isn't about I'm coming home. This is about NIL. And not all NIL is NIL. And right now, the NCAA appears to be fangless. They don't appear to have teeth. And if that's the case, NIL right now is just code for booster money.
Yeah.
Hey, as soon as you get here and you sign, here's the money. We'll come up with some NIL arrangement with some LLC somewhere. But it's not real. I mean, it's pay for play.
Yeah.
It's just now a little bit
formalized.
Restructured.
Yeah.
Yes, and so it's still who's got the most money.
Well,
if you are one of the programs that has all the money, look, the portal's right there. You can just rebuild in an instant. You can just go pluck people's starters. I mean, look at what LSU is doing in the portal right now.
Yeah.
And look, I'm not accusing LSU of doing anything wrong, but it's right there in front of you. You can see it happening.
Well, Neal, you have the intersection of that with just rampant free agency and the timelines. I mean, I don't know how, if you're a coach, you plan ahead, because you got a period of free agency that starts during the season sometimes. You got one as soon as the season is over. You got one after bowl games. You got one after the end of the semester. You got one after spring practice. I mean, I don't know how you plan ahead and manage. Yeah. One
in the middle of the year with kids who know that if they play their 5th game, they lose that year of eligibility.
Right.
But if they only play 4 games and then say, hey, I'm hurt, and enter the portal, that year doesn't count against them.
Yeah.
It's constant. And now there's this 1 year, no penalty transfer. And I'm generally for it. Like I'm pro player and have been for as long as you've known me. But man, it makes it very difficult for a program, because now you have a kid in your program. Here you are, week 5, and he goes like, "Hey, my knee's really bothering me." What do? You can't push him, because if you push him and it turns out that he was really hurt, well, I mean, you've wrecked your reputation. If he sits for a little while and then all of a sudden he's in the portal, he played you. It's not even about happy and unhappy anymore. You got a lot of kids that are like, "Hey, I just want to see if the grass is greener," or someone calls and goes, "Hey, don't finish the season there. Don't play a 5th game. We've got this NIL deal for you," which is, again, code for something else. And off we go. I mean, look at how many kids are in the portal. It's enough to basically flesh out a 2-deep for every Power 5 team. There are so many guys in the portal. And here's where I think our field is failing a little bit, Chris. We're not telling the stories of the kids that go into the portal and never land anywhere.
Yeah. Well, and then you have COVID that has really complicated it too, right? I mean, this is just a pool of, and I'm not even saying it's all bad. Somebody asked me the other day, is NIL good or bad? And my response was, ask me again in 5 years. I mean, my gut feeling is that this has always gone on at some level, and now it's at least in front of everybody, right? But I can't even process what we're seeing anymore.
I think NIL is good. Listen, it's wrong fundamentally to look at the money that's being made in college athletics. Like you talked about expansion and the SEC adding Texas and Oklahoma and the TV contracts that are out there. And let's face it, that's the reason that Texas and Oklahoma wanted to leave the Big 12 and join the SEC, was because of the money. You look at the money that coaches were making. We were just talking about Lane Kiffin a minute ago. Lane Kiffin just agreed to, I don't know if he signed it or not, I don't know that it matters, but he agreed to an extension that is essentially, I mean, picking nits here, but essentially worth $7.5 million per year. All right, Chris, I've been on this beat for 14 years. When I first got to Ole Miss, if you had told me that Ole Miss would one day be paying its head football coach on average $7.5 million per year, and that's before bonuses and such, that Lane Kiffin, if he achieved the majority of his bonuses, it's over 8. So, but let's just call it 7.5. $7.5 million. You've got coordinators. Ole Miss just lost an offensive coordinator to Oklahoma, and Ole Miss was willing to pay him $2 million a year to be a coordinator. You're telling me that the quarterback shouldn't get paid? Nah, I struggle with that. Now, I will say this. When both Nick Saban and Kirby Smart stand at the podium the day before the national championship game in Indianapolis, and they both say, these are programs, now keep in mind, these are programs that they're recruited at a ridiculously high level, can basically go tamper with any roster they want and get whoever they want. When they both tell you, hey, NIL needs to be regulated, my experience is when Nick Saban says something, we probably should listen. He's not going to be doing this that much longer, I wouldn't think. He's already won. His legacy is completely established. When Nick Saban says probably needs to be regulated, probably needs to be regulated. How do you do that? I don't know. Who does that? I don't know. Putting more on the NCAA's plate feels like an exercise in total folly. But I do think this, and I've talked to other coaches, I've talked to media people, I've talked to just kind of friends in the athletics business over the last few months who say, you know, it just kind of feels like we've opened Pandora's box a lot. Like we did too much at once, too many changes at one time. And that right now it's just the wild, wild west. And I don't know how you fix it. I don't know how you close that box, how you put the toothpaste back in the tube, whatever analogy you want to use. It just feels like it's spun not out of control, because at the end of the day, the product is pretty good. But I was talking to someone earlier today, I know I'm jumping around. I was talking to someone earlier today at a program that has been plundered a little bit by the portal. And he said, look, it comes with the territory. Because, I mean, you know, we're going to now jump in the portal and take people that we wouldn't have taken before, et cetera. He said, but nobody thinks about what this does to the fan.
Yeah.
What does this do to the fan perception? Do fans go, you know what? This isn't as fun as it used to be. If I wanted pro sports, I'd pick pro sports. I liked college sports because those were my guys and they played there for 5 years or 4 years or whatever. And I got to know them. What I liked about it was you followed a recruiting class and you followed them through, and some of them became the seniors and the captains, and they led your team to the Gator Bowl or whatever, and they meant something to you. Or they end up doing what Georgia did the other night, where you finally vanquish all the demons and you win the national championship, and those people become legends. Do you have that now? Now you have kids who come to a school, they stay for a year or two, and then they get their second payday. Now if you're a fan of a team like, let's say, South Alabama or Miami of Ohio, you get a diamond in the rough that you uncover. Well, now, at the end of his freshman or sophomore year, he's not staying at that program in all likelihood. He's stepping up a level. He can make more money. His NIL deals, an NIL deal at Texas that he could never get at Texas San Antonio, right? And so he's gone. And I don't know. I think at some point the fan starts to go, this isn't what I wanted it to be. And one thing we learned in the pandemic, I think, is that once you lose fans from the coming to the stadium and all that experience, it's very hard to get them to go back.
Man, we could spend 2 hours on that. There's so much to unpack on what you just said. I'm a free market guy by nature, and I think eventually things sort of regulate themselves. There will be some horrible deals that people are going, never should have done that. And in time, people will learn to manage this more. But I think probably the best parallel I can come up with, and this is not exact, and by the way, is another layer to this too. There's a lot of things about it I don't like, but I think you can kind of point the finger at the NCAA, because had they not bottled this up so long, then you could have eased some of this in over the years, but they didn't, and here we are. But where I keep going back to in my mind, you're a baseball guy. You remember Marvin Miller, who used to be the player's agent?
Sure.
One of the best sports books that I have ever read was his autobiography, and I don't know if you can even find if it's even print. You might be able to get a copy on eBay one day. But Marvin Miller was the head of the Players Association in the 70s, and he's the guy that ushered in free agency, and everybody told him this is going to ruin the game, all these things. And again, there are differences, right? And I think the point about fans and continuity is important, although that has a parallel to MLB too. He was told all the reasons this is going to ruin the game, this, that, and the other. The guys were started making money that was crazy at the time, and now is nothing. But point being, the thing ended up regulating itself. Baseball became more popular than ever, and you look at franchise values now, and so I think some of this is going to ruin the NCAA. Yeah, I think that there are points where, as you said again, to fan loyalty, it does, but there's so much money in this and so much interest in this, it's only going to grow. And I think that's the best parallel I can think to it. Everybody said this is horrible, this is whatever. And 45 years later, there are just unimaginable sums in baseball. I don't know how that connects there with college, because it's a little bit of a different animal, because you got an educational component there too. But it's what I keep going back to every time these big picture things come up.
But to your point, baseball had to regulate it to a degree.
Yeah.
I'm like you.
Yeah.
I'm a capitalist. I'm against. I don't like the concept of a salary cap, because I don't want someone capping my potential income. If I uncover some gold mine in this business and I find a way to make a ton, do I want it regulated? I really don't. I know if you told me, hey, you're making $200,000, but now you came up with something that would make you $2.2 million, well, I'm in. And then if they go, okay, well, $2.2 million, you could turn that into $6 million. Well, I'm in. Well, if someone goes, well, but we've decided that $4 million is your cap. Why? So I don't like the idea of a cap. That being said, you look at baseball and Major League Baseball to maintain some semblance of parity, which is important in sports. they had to put caps, and they had to put, luxury taxes, and they had to come up with different arbitration rules and with different incentives, different levels of, compensation in terms of draft picks and such. You look at, the NBA or the NHL or any of that. I mean, they kind of weight the draft. Everything is designed with the idea of promoting parity. College athletics is not that way. It's very difficult. You can't draft high school kids. You can't, the 5-star from Louisville, he can't be drafted to Michigan State. It doesn't work like that. So you don't have parity. In fact, you have the opposite of parity. You have the same programs dominating year after year after year. And like you said, Chris, we could spend a lot of time on it. I mean, you could just talk about it for days, but it does two things that I'm watching for. One is that I think ultimately the Power Five, or whatever you want to call it, I think it's inevitable that the Power Five sort of breaks away and forms its own organization, its own league, its own level, where those revenues are maximized. And what that spells for the smaller schools is disaster. But I do think that's inevitable. And then the other thing is I do think you're going to see these leagues try to come up with some form of a way to regulate in some way that in some semblance steers towards the idea of promoting some form of parity. It's the conversation I actually would love to have, like with a Greg Sankey or a Bob Bowlesby, is how much, if you could have an honest conversation, how much does parity matter to you? Does it bother you at all that the same teams win every year? Do you worry that failure to win ultimately leads to less interest and less enthusiasm from the smaller schools or the less successful schools in your conference? Or do you believe that just because of the nature of college sports and the heartstrings that are tied to it, that people will continue to support their alma maters and the schools blindly, even though there is no chance to win? And I don't know the answer to that. Like, if you're talking to an Arkansas fan or a South Carolina fan, or hell, Chris, let's be honest, most any school in the SEC not named Alabama or Auburn, when you go into the season, you're not really playing for a conference championship. You could talk about it like you are, but you're really not. At some point, does that become disheartening to fans? And does the transfer portal and NIL and all of that stack the odds even more against you? And if so, what does that do to the average fan? Does he or she say, this isn't worth it for me anymore? I don't know the answers to all those questions.
Yeah, to close the loop on that, because you've got about 5 minutes before you've got to run to another podcast. I think that when the guy that's at the top of the food chain says, "Hey, we got to look at this," I think you're right. I think that's worth listening. I do think that this is going to play out in all sorts of crazy ways that may not make the game prettier, but are probably necessary to get us towards wherever it is we need to go, however it is we need to get there.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think this is a period of transition, and I've thought for a while that we're not through with what's the word I'm looking for? Just conference affiliation. I don't think we're through with restructuring. I still think I don't think the SEC is going to stop necessarily at Oklahoma and Texas. I think there's going to be other schools that try to find a way in, and I think if you look at the way that some of the language was from ESPN, with kind of how they agreed to give Oklahoma and Texas not a piece of the pie, but an equal piece of a new pie. And they said they would be willing to do that for other member institutions if they met ESPN's kind of desired, qualifications. So you do wonder. You look around the landscape, and you see, you look around at the landscape and you see like USC in the Pac-12, or you see some of the ACC schools that are saying, hey, we can't compete financially with what the SEC is doing. You wonder whether those schools start to kind of reach out a little bit and say, hey, you got room for us? Can you make another pie for us? And that's one of the big things that I think I'm kind of watching for from a big picture standpoint moving forward.
Well, and that's where I wanted to close. Obviously, the Texas-Oklahoma merger is somewhere on the horizon. We don't know when. What do you think happens next with them joining the league and when, what the scheduling looks like, all the things that people talk about? I know that's a lot to cram into a couple of minutes, and maybe what you know, what you hear, what you think, if you want to distinguish between those things as you answer it. If you've got time, that would be good to know too.
Yeah, I don't know. I think obviously they would like to join yesterday. They'd like to get in on the revenue now. Every year that they don't get in it, that's revenue lost for them. I'm sure the networks would love to have them. I'm sure the league would love to have them. But, right now the Big 12 is kind of holding tight. I think ultimately it's always been headed towards this day where there will come a moment where they can sit together and they'll fix a price somewhere in the middle, and the Big 12 will get their pound of flesh and can claim that they won, and Texas and Oklahoma can move on and get into the SEC and get started, because that's where the money is right now. I mean, it's very clearly the high-profile league in the country. The only one that's even close is the Big 10. And when you're sitting over there in the Big 12, just wailing away at Kansas State and those kinds of games with the TV contract that's nothing resembling what the SEC has, frankly, you're just falling further behind.
Neal, any parting thoughts on SEC football or anything we've talked about just as we end the show? And when you're done with that, of course, please tell folks where they can find you, your work, your social media, whatever you would like to promote.
No, I think we pretty much covered it. I mean, I am interested to see what happens now that Georgia's gotten the championship under their belt. Does Georgia take the path of LSU where they fall off the map, or does Georgia take the path of Alabama where once you have one, it gets a lot easier to win more? I tend to think it's more the latter than it is the former. As for getting in touch with me, you can follow me on Twitter at Neal McCready. It's rebelgrove.com. It's part of the Rivals Network. As I like to say, the prices at the Rivals Network remain the same. There is no inflation. It's the same prices they were during the Jefferson administration. So you can sign up now for the same price that you would have during the French and Indian War. No other product available in the market today is the same as it was in 1812, except for Rivals.com.
This is all true. Hey, Neal, you've been a great guest. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate you.